Having 2 million subs and being something of a fixture in the zeitgeist, it was inevitable that some channels would attempt a few haughty deconstructions and takedowns of the critical drinker. Most of them are opportunists and ankle-biters, affecting to be somehow more principled and high-minded, and their arguments are tedious. But there is one YouTuber, Pillar of Garbage, who in setting out to diss the drinker's crowdfunded thriller release Rogue Elements, tried to press academic theory into his attacks of the production, the drinker, and basically a whole online commentary ecosystem. And as someone who adores pointing out phony posturing, this was like a red rag to a bull.
Longtime viewers will remember that this is not the first video I've made in response to the Critical Drinkers channel.
In hoping to slag off the drinker's rogue elements, Pillar of Garbage puts forth analogous arguments. One, that the drinker's rogue elements wasn't received well by the kind of reviewers and cultural commentators in Pillar's own milieu, and that this, therefore, undermines the drinker's authenticity and standing as a cultural commentator, and that it speaks to a wider theme of Pillar's, of conservatives mocking contemporary culture, but not being able to walk the walk when it comes to producing any compelling alternatives.
I contend that by considering the film together with the guy's work here on YouTube, the basic flaws that lie at the heart of the drinker's critical/creative mindset, indeed, the flaws that underpin this whole wave of conservative cultural commentators, reveal themselves.
Pillar of Garbage is disingenuous from the start by failing to properly give context to the conception and development of rogue elements. As a proof of concept, the Rogue Elements release is just that. Maximized tropes, conflated elements, a demonstration of the form and fundamentals of what could then, with proper backing, be worked up into a more sophisticated iteration, in line with its source material and aesthetic, and a more accomplished cast. Pillar of Garbage slinks around this, or tries to, because he wants the neater symmetry for his wider argument about conservatives and conservative culture. If you wanted to compare this iteration of Rogue Elements with a $300,000 proof-of-concept half-hour featurette of The Acolyte, with actors reflecting that budget, I think Rogue Elements would stand a pretty decent chance of taking the gold. I would contest people such as Pillar of Garbage are guilty of a form of Philistinism. They ultimately feel an impulse to defend contemporary culture against the critiques of those they construe to be conservative, and therefore will minimize, overlook, lamely vouch for the actual flakier elements, the cringe-worthy, disproportionately or clunkily emphasized identity politics stuff, the co-opting of existing franchises, alienating of fan bases, and indulgent excesses of their own preoccupations, and the lack of quality or market performance of such contemporary stuff. Because conceding to the shrewd and often amusing critiques of YouTubers like The Critical Drinker is impermissible. The likes of Pillar of Garbage won't police the excesses of liberalism and progressivism in entertainment. That is a large driver of post-cultural banality and malaise. Pillar of Garbage knows The Acolyte and Rings of Power are crap. He knows The Critical Drinker's breakdowns of them are fundamentally right, but he is unable to acknowledge this, so has to go ad hominem, attacking the persona rather than addressing the critiques directly. Hence the impulse throughout his videos to reduce the drinker to caricature or show footage of him with right-wing personalities. This refusal to rigorously address the flakier side of contemporary popular entertainment is left-wing or liberal Philistinism, and it's a large part of why I prefer to hang out with guys like the drinker. I stream with them as a liberal to get away from the likes of Pillar of Garbage, because he has no particular ideas or things to provoke me with. Plus, those guys are a laugh. Pillar of Garbage then presses academic theory into his case, which, in the skittish, low attention span churn of entertainment commentary on YouTube, is always a little dodgy. Expanding on such ideas smoothly, incorporated over the span of several hours, is fine. But high academic rationales and discourses shoveled into 20-minute-long pop culture-themed videos almost always comes across as not suited to the proportions and stilted. Like turning up to a frat party, switching off the Kendrick Lamar and putting on Wagner's Ring Cycle and expounding on the symphonic achievement of Brunhilde's Immolation. Nobody likes capsule guide posturing. Pillar of Garbage relies almost solely on the academic Frederick Jameson. Published just recently was the volume The Years of Theory, a retrospective introduction to the post-war French thinkers, structuralists and post-structuralists, Marxists and psychoanalysts, whose ideas Jameson has done so much to bring to several generations of students.
For anyone who didn't do an English degree, Jameson was a prolific literary critic and cultural theorist.
I have a master's degree with honors in English.
Probably most famous for his seminal work, Postmodernism, The Cultural Logic of Late Capitalism, was an excerpt from his essay Reification and Utopia in Mass Culture, what he called the commodification of narrative.
There's one slight issue that Pillar of Garbage sort of skipped over, which is Jameson was, first and last, a Marxist. Among his more than 24 books of literary and cultural criticism, the titles Marxism and Form from 1971 and The Political Unconscious from 1981 might be the most important. The first of these rehearsed the ideas of a cohort of Western Marxists to argue for a dialectical criticism that could uncover the otherwise occluded reality of capitalist social relations through a formal analysis of literature. And the second went further, to insist on Marxism as the sole means of thought adequate to grasping all cultural artifacts and periods, as vital episodes in a single, vast, unfinished plot, namely that of class society from the first agricultural settlements down to global capitalism. Now, Marxism doesn't just mean communism. It takes in economic determinism, dialectical materialism, as well as class struggle, but the fundamentals are there. Jameson affirmed that Marxism does not so much stand athwart other ideologies or philosophies as it includes them, incorporating their insights while encompassing a vaster purview, that of totality itself. As he puts it in The Political Unconscious, Marxism is here conceived as the untranscendable horizon that subsumes such apparently antagonistic and incommensurable critical operations, assigning them an undoubted sectoral validity within itself, and thus at once cancelling and preserving them. If you were to ask me whether, in terms of framing insights about the state of popular entertainment, I lean more toward a no-nonsense Scot giving the lay of the land, or an academic with a sense of Marxism as simultaneously transcending, subordinating, and absorbing most if not all other theories, then, respect for academic rigor aside, if I want to get shrewd insights into the identity politics and production calamity of Rachel Zegler's Snow White, I'll plump for the Scot, thanks. Part of this leaning will be due to another lapse I see, and Pillar of Garbage doesn't, in the academic estimation of things, that the idea of dialectical criticism, uncovering the otherwise occluded reality of capitalist social relations, is to a great extent labored, because capitalist social relations are in many respects warily self-evident. Yes, there are Byzantine supply chains, manipulations, complex, enmeshed institutional and entrepreneurial constructs, abstract realms of crypto and meta-financial currencies and markets. But the notion such occluded capitalist social relations could be uncovered, exposed, in some way influenced through formal analysis of literature and the world of the humanities was never going to offer up much in the way of impactful, transformational strategies. This is the door swinging the other way in Pillar of Garbage's contention about walking the walk. Generally speaking, such academic deconstruction, or framing, is usually impotent in the real-time, vulgar, heedless churn and tumult of culture and society. Often elegant, it is insufficiently practicable, actionable, interceding, reshaping. It is the intelligent, perceptive, oh-so-clever wallflower with no dance partner watching the dance. Towards the end of his video, Pillar of Garbage tries to press in Edmund Burke. Again, contextually clumsy because it is such a vast area of hierarchies, society, and history, and not elegantly aligned to the incredulous, often not especially sober, criticisms of She-Hulk Attorney at Law or Velma. But there is one notion Pillar of Garbage does adequately rig up, the conservative idea that the past, coinciding with an adherent's own life and experience, is usually and distortedly framed as better than a muddled, unappealing, or degraded present.
Because what is that impulse, that reifying placement of a subjectively selected and defined cultural good above history, outside of any ideological or economic spheres, if not the seed of conservatism itself?
The problem with unloading this dump truck's worth of academic material into a YouTube video is that Pillar of Garbage comes up against an absolutely defendable wider contention from the drinker.
What's positioned in a Critical Drinker video or live stream appearance as insight into timeless, objective writing skill is simply a comparison between one sort of commodified late capitalist narrative style and a whole bunch of others. A comparison blind to its own cultural contingency.
The fact there are substantially less original franchises today compared to 30 years ago is demonstrably true. The notion that Alien and Aliens are better than Alien Romulus is demonstrably true. The fact Star Wars under Disney and The Lord of the Rings under Amazon lack the spirit and magic and wonder of the original trilogies is demonstrably true. Sorry, Pillar of Garbage, tooling around with Edmund Burke isn't going to offer any cover or solution to those realities. There is a key element Pillar of Garbage neglected when it comes to Fredric Jameson. Jameson was preoccupied with the idea of everything being commoditized and simulacra, copies without originality, mass-produced copies of copies. He hated style over substance, surface over depth, and the idea that sincerity could be considered naive. The Critical Drinker is kicking up a fuss over all of that. In critiquing conservatism, Pillar of Garbage reiterates the idea that conservative media can't walk the walk.
And to consider whether or not this wide, superficially appealing, conservative approach to culture has ever been worth shit.
Here, I'm going to introduce a framework of my own about conservatism and liberalism. Liberalism has a higher top end, psychological and intellectual receptivity to aesthetics, irony, academia, abstraction, the world of the mind. It also has a deep lower end, studies showing a greater susceptibility to neuroses, morbidity, insecurity, marred proclivities socially, and in findings of personal happiness. Conservatism is less interested in the life of the mind and is more practically involved with the real world. It has less psychological and intellectual receptivity to aesthetics, academia, abstraction, so it has a lower top end. It also, however, has a higher floor, less susceptibility to neuroses, morbidity, insecurity, marred proclivities socially, and in findings of personal happiness. Generally speaking, and this doesn't mean specifically you, particular viewer, this means that conservatism doesn't produce the majority of great works of culture, of literature, or cinema. But it is also very shrewdly adept at calling out bullshit, reckoning with and smelling out flakiness, contrivance, neurosis, and the like, which means, ultimately, that contrary to Pillar of Garbage's attempted formulation, that conservatism's lack of high-end stuff means it is therefore compromised in its ability to be savvy and accurate in its critiques. I would argue that conservatism is ideally placed to make such critiques. Pillar of Garbage's attempted Critical Drinker takedowns are driven not by demonstrable evidence of the drinker being wrong or unsophisticated in his critiques, but by a somewhat insecure desire for them to be wrong, that the drinker ought to be disparaged on some set of principles. Well, just because a commentator or thinker touches a nerve doesn't mean that commentator is slipshod or phony. Sadly, Pillar of Garbage is a bit of both of those things. The upshot of all of this is the reality, which you will have cottoned onto by now, that I am the perfect YouTube specimen, the very best refined elements of liberal humanist culture and intellect, with a cross-ideological penchant for calling a spade, hanging out with the most interesting dudes, having his finger on the pulse, and being the ideal guy with the ideal channel for you to like and subscribe. After writing and then producing this video and listening to it through, I would subscribe to me, so I don't know what's possibly holding you back.